Thank you very much. So, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be back at PETS. So today I will showcase a work that we co-authored with colleagues from the Singapore Management University, and which was supervised by Professor Delphine Reinhardt, who's sitting there. So let's get into it. So I will start with a pretty bold statement, which is that smart speakers are extremely commonplace. And of course, there are no problems whatsoever about smart speakers. Thank you. No, so it might be a bit of a shock, but there are definitely privacy risks about smart speakers. So notably, sensitive data can be exposed in shared spaces, whether it's at home, but also increasingly in other settings like at work, in co-shared spaces. So current smart speakers, they broadcast information identically, regardless of location or bystanders, so no matter who's in the room or whatever. So in other words, they lack context awareness. So we also think that these threats are bound to evolve because of, on the one hand, the rise of proactive assistants that are also being powered by LLMs, like Amazon launched last year, Alexa Plus. So we think that if this is left unchecked, we could see maybe in the near future some scenarios that would go more or less like this. Imagine you're at work, you're with your boss, and you ordered food for the both of you using your smart speaker. And your boss is really nice with you and offers you to pay you back. And you're still waiting for that raise. So you're like, no, it's fine. I can afford it. Turns out you can't, and your smart speaker knows that. And it chimes in and says, well, you have exceeded your credit limit by $25, which could be a little bit embarrassing. So we don't want this to happen, right? So we set on exploring users' preferences for smart speaker responses in different contexts. And so what defines their preferences? Is it maybe their dispositional traits, so stuff that's inherent to the person? So your age, your gender, your education, your smart speaker use habits, and so on. Or is it maybe the situational context, like the presence of bystanders, their role towards you, how close you are to them, and your own intent? Or is it a mix of both, and so on? So with this goal in mind, we set to conduct an online vignette survey with 944 smart speaker users based in Germany and Singapore. We asked our participants to evaluate 4 scenarios out of 12. I will get into this in a second. For the main measures, we looked at their preferred statement out of 3 possibilities. We also checked the social closeness to different bystanders using the personal acquaintance measure scale and their privacy concerns through the consent for information privacy scale. And for the analysis, we used descriptives, but also a set of ordinal regression models, which I won't get into here, but you can read the paper. Okay, so about the scenarios, we had 4 main topics: money, location, social communication, and health, with a number of scenarios in each of these topics. And you will see that some of them, so 1 for each topic, is a so-called deceptive intent variant. And the example I just gave earlier with the boss, that's actually the budget deceptive variant. And so for each of these scenarios, so participants had 1 for each topic. They had to answer it for different contexts. So either alone with their partner or with their friend at home, or alone with their coworker or with their boss at work. So all of these. And for each of these variants, they had to choose 1 out of 3 statement propositions that varied in privacy sensitivity. So I'll give another example. This one is the allowance scenario in the money topic, at home with your partner and without any deceptive intent. So it goes like this: you're at home, you're with your partner, Sarah. You say to the smart speaker, please transfer my children's allowance to their account. And then which of these statements from the smart speaker would you most prefer for this situation? So then we have the low privacy sensitivity proposition, which is the allowance has been transferred. The medium one, which is $25, has been transferred. And the high one, which is $25, has been transferred into accounts number 313, and so on. And it's like this for every scenario and all different variants. You just replace partner with friend, boss, and the name is given by the participant and was discarded at the end. Right. And lastly, before we get into the findings, I want to mention that we conducted a separate study with LLMs to see how our participants' preferences align with AI preferences. So we prompted three LLMs with two tasks. The first was to evaluate the same scenarios and choose the most appropriate statement, exactly like our participants. And the second one was to generate alternative statements to see how well they fare in this regard. Right, so now let's get on to our key findings, starting with the first research questions, which was which was how do users' preferences for smart speaker interactions vary with dispositional traits and situational contexts. So I mentioned ordinal regression models earlier, and so we ranked different models that were based on different factors, and we ranked them in performance. And so models that use situational factors like the present bystander, the topic of discussion, the intent of the user, were far better at predicting statement preference compared to models that were based on dispositional traits like demographics or general privacy concerns. So we found that privacy concerns, they do set a baseline for preference, but they are less impactful than the context when it comes to predicting statement preference. And this aligns with contextual integrity, and it kind of busts, again, the myth of the privacy paradox. So now on to the next finding. So the second research question was how do social roles and closeness regulate smart speaker information disclosure preferences? So if you look at this figure here, you have the proportion of choices across both of our samples, and for each type of bystander, whether it's at home or at work. And you see here a clear hierarchy between social roles. We see that users disclosed less as the bystanders shifted from intimate to professional roles. That goes from partner to the friend to the coworker and to the boss. So the closer participant is the present bystander, the more likely they are to prefer more sensitive statements. And we also observed two distinct social dynamics. The first was that for personal relationships, like with the partner and with a friend, the choice was fully mediated by social closeness. In other words, the closer you are to your partner, the more likely you are to choose higher, more sensitive statements. But when it comes to professional roles, even though you might be very close to your boss, the users, they restricted disclosure to their boss regardless of how close they are. So we observed a structural barrier here. Next, on to the third finding, which was about how a user's deceptive intent might affect their preference for smart speaker responses. Here again, we have a similar kind of figure with deception variance and not deceptive variance. Also, again, for both samples and across all of the different topics. And here again, we observe a clear difference where when it comes to deceptive variance, there is a much higher tendency for low sensitivity choices. And our model also confirms this, where we observed a significant decrease of 59% in odds of choosing high sensitivity statements in deceptive scenarios. So we found that participants, they favor low sensitivity statements for deceptive variants, not only to avoid disclosure and therefore preserve their privacy, but also to manage their social impressions. In other words, to avoid being embarrassed for when they are caught lying, like in the example I showed at the start. Right, and we'll finish with the fourth key finding, which was about how users' preferences for smart speaker interactions compare with LLMs. So this relates to the second study I mentioned earlier. So we found that LLMs generally aligned with participants' preferences, though they tended to choose lower sensitivity statements, so they were a little bit more conservative in this regard. And we observed, let's say, a broader proportion of choices in our human participants. They also correctly adapted to professional settings. So, for example, when it comes to the boss, they chose lower sensitivity statements, much like our participants. In terms of cons, we found that they struggled with deceptive context. So they tend to prioritize facts over the user's social reputation and might actually expose them by trying to save them, actually. And they also defaulted to Western-centric individualistic privacy standards, missing cultural nuances. Right, so I'm kind of out of time. So We have basically three propositions when it comes to design guidelines. One that goes from coarse to more granular setups, and we also have one half the word using LLMs to fine tune that we could fine tune so that we can bring more context-aware smart speakers. So I'm happy to discuss these with you over the poster. And so here are the three out of the four main takeaways that I discussed in this talk. Right. So with that being said, I will stop on that. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to see you at the poster. Thank you.